Hello, I'm Bruce Johnson, and thanks for joining us tonight for this special edition of Off Script. This Wednesday marks 50 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Dr. King was in Memphis, Tennessee to bring national attention to a strike by sanitation workers. Words of King's death triggered riots in cities across the country, including right here in Washington, D.C. More than 35 people were killed across the country in the violence. Over the next few days, we're going to be taking a closer look at the moments following his death. You're going to hear from civil rights leaders, Dr. King's family, and those who lived through the riots in our neighborhoods. We're going to begin by going back, though, to a family we first introduced you to some 30 years ago. Robert and Alice Bates lived in Northeast D.C. They had been longtime members of the historic Shiloh Baptist Church in D.C. Shaw community, one of those areas hit by the riots. And when I sat down with Robert and Alice Bates in 1986, they were determined that their children would realize much of the dream that Dr. King had promised.
Martin Luther King said that any religion that professes to be concerned with the souls of men and is not concerned about the conditions that damn them is a spiritually dying religion in need of new blood. Washington Shiloh Baptist Church has been at the forefront of the civil rights movement. Its members help make up the armies that march for black equality.
King had a dream that was bigger than he was. Even in his famous speech, he talked about little black boys and little black girls getting to a situation where they can walk hand in hand in freedom and in understanding. His dream was bigger than he himself.
I could see what he was doing. Eventually, I would not have to suffer those disrespects that we had to.
That's Robert Bates Sr., church deacon. He marched to the Lincoln Memorial with Dr. King in 1963. He did it for self-dignity, for family. Robert Bates was constantly reminded of his second-class citizenship as a child in Louisiana and later as a Postal Service employee here in Washington.
Those supervisors there would take a letter or something and hand it to you, or pretend to hand it to you. And when you reach for it, they would jerk it back and spit this tobacco juice on your hands.
This is the Robert Bates family of Northeast Washington. Alice, his wife of 52 years.
How would you grade yourself in terms of how your children turned out?
Excellent.
Robert Jr. is a lobbyist for Mobil Oil, Kenneth, a government accountant, Martin, a maintenance supervisor with AT&T, Merle, operator of a health center in Cleveland. In all, there are 6 college-trained children, 10 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. This is a portrait of a black American family. They struggled, loved, and succeeded together.
For some reason, I remember one piece of chicken on Sunday was what each of us got to eat. I remember when Bobby went away to college, he came back saying, "Do you know people eat a steak all by themselves?" So yeah.
Some good ham. What kind is that?
The Bates children know they benefited from the civil rights movement and the affirmative action programs that followed. But they explained that new laws and programs alone did not guarantee their success.
I qualified myself for a job that could have gone to a white or to a black, but I don't feel that I took someone else's job.
I'm intelligent, and I'm going out there to do the best job that I can, not only to make my family proud of me, but also because I want to be proud of myself.
Too many of us, I think, want things easy, quick, and fast. And things don't come easy, quick, and fast. You got to hustle. You got to stay in there. You got to hang in.
Martin Luther King said the privileged Negro will never be what he ought to be until the underprivileged Negro is what he ought to be. So what responsibility do the Bates children have to the masses and their unfulfilled dreams? It depends on who you ask.
It isn't so much that we've forgotten about them as it is that we're all following our native instincts. Everybody's responsibility is to number one. And if we took care of ourselves and our own better, there would be fewer of the problems that you are describing.
I really feel that, you got to get out and give a little bit more. It's going to take something away from us, maybe. But in the long run, it's going to make your own grow stronger because they see you sharing, they see you loving and giving, and they're going to grow up that way, and they're going to do the same thing.
There's 2 different black worlds out there. You had a world where those of us that are successful, and you have those that are still out on the street. And the gap between the 2 is getting even wider.
A lot of people have given up hope, and they'd rather just be satisfied with any handout the government would give them.
As deeply religious people, Robert and Alice Bates didn't mortgage their children's futures for their own comfort and safety. During tough, segregated times, they sacrificed to assure their children a future.
God feeds the birds, but he doesn't drop it in their nests.
That was Robert and Alice Bates, over 30 years ago, talking to me from their modest home in Northeast D.C. That incredible couple, married for well over 50 years, no longer with us tonight, but their children are with us. Pan out and let people see this family. They're joining us live here in the studio. You can figure out on your own who's who based on what you just saw. We've all aged a little bit, okay? But Mary, I want to start with you. Mom and Dad no longer with us. When did they pass away?
Mom passed in October of 1993, and Dad passed in January 1994. I think they both would be very proud of the accomplishments that we have made and those of our children and grandchildren over these past 30 years.
Yeah, yeah. But Bobby, what did you think when you watched that? Look at where we are now.
That was very emotional. And I was thinking then that we had gone through such a traumatic time because of Dr. King's assassination. And then I would have imagined that 50 years later, things would be different. But I'm frightened and fear that my generation has failed a generation of young folk. Because today we've got our young people now, we send them out to school in the morning, we don't know if they're coming home. I am deeply, deeply concerned, frustrated, angry that guns is such a pernicious, traumatic infection in our society.
Whether we're talking guns in the streets or people with guns infiltrating schools.
Wherever.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't think, I wasn't smart enough back then, 30 years ago, to ask your parents about, could you imagine us having a black president? Could you imagine that 30 years ago? Well, what would your mom and dad have said if they had lived to see Barack and Michelle Obama in the White House?
I know they would have been quite impressed with Barack and Michelle Obama. What they would have said back then, I'm not sure, but it's a miracle that it happened. And I think that the United States is set for anybody to be a president in this country, whether it's a black person, a white person, a man, or a woman. I think that they are impressed that it could have happened, and it should happen over and over again.
Okay, before I go much further, give me some numbers here. How many kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, anybody know how many college degrees we've got here? How many firefighters, police officers? I mean, anybody got any numbers? Wow. And I'm going to ask a tough question because we've talked about this, dispelling the stereotypes. I think you told me nobody in this family has ever been arrested and gone to jail.
Correct.
Okay.
Not today.
Okay. Again, though, typical of most of our families, okay? Going to dispel the myths here. Your name?
Kiva Bates.
Who do you belong to?
I belong to him over there.
Him,
The
okay.
young man over there.
Young man over there. Your concerns, and what do you think after seeing this piece, you know, with your grandparents?
I have to say that I'm really proud to see them be able to speak about the trials and triumphs that they experienced during their time, but also for my generation, things have been a bit different. We were labeled Generation X. So my classmates and I, or my generation, I would say that my sisters and I all have college degrees. My baby sister, I'm so proud of her, has 2 master's degrees. Mm-hmm. So we are moving forward in the dreams and goals of my grandparents in terms of education. Myself personally, I'm pursuing a degree in medical school, so I'll be taking the MCAT this year and applying. But I know for them, they wanted more than what they had coming up in the 20s and 30s and 50s and 40s.
They had it hard. Okay. What about excuses? Would they accept, tolerate excuses?
We can have excuses. So. I mean, what they did, they set an infrastructure for us to succeed. And what we have a legacy to go forward. So I believe that they were successful in what they brought forward, but I believe our generation did not carry forward the coming generations.
How so?
Well, we tend to enable or solve our children's problems for them. So they have a problem in just dealing with life situations.
We want to give them stuff.
You're right.
Makes us feel better.
We want to solve their hard problems for them. We won't allow them to figure it out.
Yeah. So we're having some of the same problems that other okay and well-to-do people have. Okay. How to raise their kids, their issues. You know. I want to go back to what you were saying, Bobby. You talked about in that piece about taking care of your own first. What do you mean by that?
I mean exactly that we have a responsibility to do what's necessary to make life decent and wholesome for ourselves. And we also have to accept and be accountable. We live under a current administration that's blaming everybody else for what's going on, which is exactly the opposite of what our parents taught us. If you did something wrong, you got to stand up, take responsibility for it, do what's right to correct it.
And you've talked about it, and we talked about it in the green room, accountability to the family. You owe the family, the legacy. It's not just about you.
Exactly. So with my grandparents going through what they went through, I know that my grandfather and one of his friends worked towards equal housing opportunities. My grandmother down in Mississippi was the first black on the school board in Long Beach, Mississippi. They fought for us to have that opportunity to come forward and to learn how to do things and be able to bring our people forward, not just, you know, the family itself, but if our family is healthy, we can make an impact in the community.
Excellent. Wrap it up for me. Are you optimistic? Whoa.
Wow, it was quiet.
Mary, you optimistic?
I tend to be somewhat optimistic when I see young people like the children from Parkland School taking charge. And unfortunately, we don't see more of that. We see so many of the negative that we do tend to lose hope. But I think the future will be okay.
Well, we're going to end on that positive note. And you know what? Let's do this again in another 30 years. Okay?
All right.
That's funny.
Back in a minute.